Probably this one. Okay, this is Silken Court. This is the second to last boss in the raid. And this one is something else on Mythic. We'll just talk about Heroic first. So, two bosses. They share a health pool, so you can hit either. Stacking them up, you get to do more damage. They start separate. This one is movable. The other one is a caster who is not movable. He will teleport around the room at certain points of the fight. You don't get to control that. But the idea would be pull them together on pull, and they have basically one main mechanic per phase that you have to deal with or wipe, and a couple of other side mechanics that's just like dodge, kill ads, or stuff like that. So this is P1. Everyone or a bunch of people are going to get this debuff. On Mythic it is everybody. So you just lose spread, it goes off, it does some damage, it puts a dot on you for a while. It's not really that bad. The caster boss just jumped away. He, I believe, always jumps to the same position, which is good for planing, which is currently on the opposite side of the room. Now, this boss is going to do a rotation of abilities that are the main mechanics. So he is going to Call of the Swarm, which spawns ads. He is going to cast a frontal Impaling Eruption, which is baited at players. I don't know if it's just melee or just ranged. We have it in our raid plan to kind of stack up in two different groups, so we'll be able to see that. There's a frontal. Don't get hit by the frontal. Slow and kill the ads. Immediately after the frontal, they are going to spawn webs, which are also baited on players. These webs are required for the key mechanic of phase 1. How the webs work is they will spawn. You'll see the there's a little like bomb in the middle of the web. What needs to happen is you have groups of 2 players, most definitely ranged or healers. You need 3 groups of 2 players on Heroic. You need 4 on Mythic. And what you're going to do is with your 2 players, you're both going to step into the damage part of the web, and then one person is going to run into the middle to break it. This is going to link those 2 players together. So you're going to see DDs and Karen are going to go to that one. Peaches and I are going to go to that one. We both walk in. Peaches walks in, hits the middle. We are tethered. They are tethered. Somebody else is already tethered. You can see, just like Nerub'ar Fire Hose, this puts a max radius around, so you know how far you can go before you would break the radius going from another player. So the purpose of this mechanic is because this boss is going to do a charge across the room, similar to Urktos in Council of Dreams from Mirjastil. In Urktos, you had to have a certain number of people soak it. On this fight, you have to have the boss run through 3 tethers. If he doesn't hit 3 tethers, he will hit the wall. So what he's going to do is he's going to burrow underground to the opposite side of the room of the caster boss, and then he's going to turn around and do like a 6 or 8 second charged cast, and at the end of it, he's going to charge back across the room directly at where the caster boss is standing. So you can pre-position and know where he's going to go. So the ideal thing to do would be right when these webs spawn, your players who are designated to get these webs should get them basically immediately. These 2 do. I don't know if they were supposed to or not, but they do. Ideally, we would go and get ours immediately. We can already pre-position across the room right now, somewhere from like this spike over here to this spike over here, because we know where the caster boss is, and we know the melee boss is going to charge at the caster boss. So we could get our webs and immediately be spreading across the room. We weren't doing that because this is the first time we saw the fight, but so we get our webs and we start to get in position. The boss is now burrowing away to do his charge. So here's the idea. You spread the tether across the charge. Yay, that's it. You just make sure he has to go through all 3 of these. There was bugginess on beta where sometimes he would stop after 2, sometimes he would run through all 3 and not get counted, whatever. You make sure he charges through the tethers. Once he hits the required number of tethers, he is stunned for 6 seconds and takes a damage amp, so everybody should be hitting him. Ideally, in that case, since you know he's going to be charging at the other boss, you have your melee on the other boss, you have your final tether right next to the other boss, so it stops him right on the other boss, melee turn around and hit him during his damage amp. And that is basically it for P1. It is those mechanics. He's going to repeat them again, so he does them twice, just like the first boss did his mechanics twice in P1. He's going to do a slightly different order, but the same mechanics. He's going to do his frontal. Eventually, he will spawn ads. They spawn webs. There you go. So we can go and get our web buffs again. Again, especially on Heroic, it is much better to get it early. On Mythic, I think the debuff does a bit more damage, so we may not be able to get it as soon as possible. The spider boss just jumps. This will likely be where the spider boss is going to be during the charge, so we know that the melee boss is going to be on the other side of the room during the charge. We could currently be pre-planning across the room this way with our tethers. Obviously, we didn't fully know that on beta. But boss just spawned scarabs. Let's see if that is actually where the caster boss is, or if he jumps again. He jumps again, so he actually does jump over there. So that is going to be where the caster boss is. We can spread across the room left and right. Boss burrows now, does it again, goes back into charge. Obviously, you can see when he does his charge, also people have green circles. If you are not a tethered person, you really shouldn't be hitting this boss at this time and getting in the way of the tethered people. That will be way more important on Mythic. But here you go. We've got tethers across it. Hopefully we got them all. Looks like it worked. Maybe it is 2 on Heroic and 3 on Mythic instead of 3 and 4. I don't remember.
Those tethers do damage? Because people were still tethered there.
The tethers were super buggy. So it is not clear. Doesn't actually say anymore how many it takes. What? Interesting. Okay. It might be 2 on Heroic and 3 on Mythic, or it's 3 on Mythic and or 3 on Heroic and 4 on Mythic. I don't know. We're gonna have designated people. If you're melee, you don't have to worry about it. If you're ranged, you'll know exactly what you need to do. So yeah, the boss does that rotation twice. He casts some other abilities before going into Intermission 1, which is going to be caster boss in Intermission. Boss has a shield. We have to break the shield. Boss is doing memory game and pie slices. So he is going to spawn pie slices across the room from each other. So there's the first one, it's going this way and it's going that way. And second one, boom, there and there. The pattern is random every time, but effectively what this is going to do is the first ones that were spawned are going to be the first ones that blow up. The second ones that spawn will be the second ones. The idea is pretty simple. Stand in one of them that is a later one, but is right next to an earlier one. Once that one blows up, you swap over. Standing in it gives you a little bit of damage, but it doesn't hurt that bad. But there you go. It blew up. We move out of it. This is the entirety of the intermission. It's just going to repeat this. You just do it until you break the boss's shield. Any questions about P1 or Intermission 1? Okay, no questions. They're fairly simple. It's just getting used to the flow of the mechanics. It's really not that hard unless you're actually somebody who's dealing with the tethers and the charges. You really don't have much else to do besides dodge frontals. Intermission 1 is now over. So now the caster boss is going to have his special ability. The caster boss is going to be the one who does frontals. He's going to just keep casting. But eventually he is going to put out 3 debuffs onto 3 players. And they kind of work like the debuffs from the 9 if you did that fight in Sanctum of Domination, but not quite. So basically the 3 debuffs are going to go out on 3 players, and the idea is that the boss is eventually going to do a long cast that when it ends wipes the raid. The 3 debuffs that are out, if you get all 3 of those debuffs onto the same person, so stacked to 3, it will stun that person immediately. It will also stun that boss if you put it on the boss instead of on a player. So the idea is that you dispel the 3 debuffs onto the boss to make sure he gets his 3rd stack when he is casting his long wipe the raid thing, so it stuns him so he can't finish the cast. He takes a damage jam. The interesting thing with these debuffs is that while anyone, the boss or a player, has a stack of the debuff, they are taking a damage increase. It's like 50% damage increase. But that also means that if you dispel it onto the boss will be taking a 50% damage increase. That stacks, and that stays for the entire length of the debuff. On players, the debuff is permanent. On the boss, the debuff lasts 12 seconds. So you can't just dispel them onto the boss early and have him take a massive damage increase for the whole time and then dispel the last stack at the end. You will have to dispel them within a certain time period. The ideal would be that you are dispelling them so that they are on the boss as long as possible before you dispel the next stack, where you're ending basically dispelling the last stack onto the boss right before his big AoE cast would finish, so that you've maximized your debuff time on the boss. You can basically time this out to where you're getting 30 seconds of increased damage taken on that boss, and that's 10 seconds of 50%, 10 seconds of 100%, and then 10 seconds at the end, or maybe I think the last one actually only lasts 6 seconds because it's once he gets stunned, of 150% damage increase. That is a massive damage increase and is not something you want to waste. So the timing of when the debuffs get dispelled would be really important if we're trying to be ideal. I don't know how much it's going to matter to be as ideal as possible. On beta, what we did, because we didn't have weak auras and that coordination was difficult, is we just mass dispelled them onto the boss when he was doing his cast so that we didn't wipe. Obviously that is not ideal from a damage perspective, but it allowed us to keep staying alive. So we'll get to that in a second. The first thing that the boss is going to do is he's going to port away. He's going to cast Void Step, so you know when he does it. He is going to port away, and then he is going to web every player in the room and pull them all to the boss, and then do a 20-yard AoE. Just get out of the AoE. Also, when he pulls everyone in, he tethers everyone to another player. So just like in P1, when you hit the web and it tethered two people together, now everybody in the raid is tethered to somebody else. So you run out of his AoE thing and you run away from your tethered player to break the tether. You don't need the tethers in P2. So you see everybody here breaking their tethers. The debuff has gone out, so this is what it looks like. The melee boss is the one who casts the debuff. I believe he casts it like right before the Void Step or during the Void Step and pull. But yeah, so the debuff is out on these three players. Like I said, in beta, we didn't have super good coordination or weak auras or anything, so we're just going to mass dispel these on the boss when the time comes. And we will see that whenever I believe the boss is going to Void Step. Yeah, so you see these three people are already on 3 markers. The idea behind this debuff is once you dispel it, it goes to the next closest player or to the boss. So they need to be apart from each other and have the next closest thing be the boss. So everybody else is getting the hell out of the middle. Only those 3 people are in there. The boss is going to jump to the middle. They get mass dispelled when he starts his cast here. They get mass dispelled, goes on to the boss, stuns him, his cast is done, he now has a damage increase. Like I said, what we did here was not optimal from a damage perspective, but it was easy and allowed us to continue on in the fight. From a damage perspective, you're going to want to dispel those onto the boss one at a time, leaving them on a boss for as long as possible before they're about to fall off before refreshing it. That will be tricky. And that is all of P2. He's going to repeat those just like they did, repeating the mechanics in P1. So this guy will spawn more ads. He's going to do a slightly different mechanic order, just like they did in P1, where he pulls you in first. You gotta get out of the AoE, break your tethers. Stinging Swarm is the debuff. The boss is casting it on it now. So one thing to note is the first time the debuffs go out, that first rotation of mechanics, you actually basically want to dispel the first debuff instantly, because there's less than 30 seconds from when those debuffs go out to when you would need to stun the boss. So you just want to get it onto the boss as fast as possible and then roll the debuff. The second time these come out, they come out way earlier than when the boss is going to do his final AoE cast. Something like 45 seconds to a minute before he needs to be stunned, so you have to hold them on whoever's on them. Theoretically, you could dispel them off of a player if they're going to die or something onto another player, but you'll be holding those for a while. So like Brain Beta has one. And then they're just going to keep doing their mechanics. The boss just ported over there. He did a frontal. Keeping doing mechanics. I believe this rotation, when the boss ports to middle, he is not going to immediately do his big AoE cast. He actually does another suck into the middle first. So he's void stepping now. Void steps to the middle. We get sucked in first. Everybody has to run out. He does his AoE in the middle, and then he is going to do his long cast that kills everyone. Cataclysmic Entropy. So again, here we just have our people with the debuffs in mid getting mass dispelled, and the boss is now stunned. And that's that. These people have not broken their tether yet, but we're about to go to Intermission 2, which will be the melee boss in middle. You'll very quickly be able to see what this intermission is. Hey, it's spike rings. Dodge spike rings. That is it. They look cool. So, super simple Intermission 2. I believe I have like the... Yeah. So this is the slight raid plan. So they're split apart. You're in a loose spread. You kind of want the ranged and melee grouping up on opposite sides of the boss to see if we can bait this frontal either towards one group or the other so they don't have to move. Ads are spawning at this time immediately after the frontal goes off. You want to bring boss to the other boss so you're getting cleave damage.
And the caster boss refuses to move.
Yeah,
it's like his own thing.
He doesn't move unless he jumps. It may not be worth it to actually pull this guy across the room because these mechanics kind of happen in sequence. Like the boss jumps across the room, the other boss immediately starts his sequence of doing a cast to spawn ads, doing a cast to frontal, and then like right after the frontal is done is when you could move him. It's probably still worth it because you can get him over there like 5 seconds before he does the charge. That's 5 seconds of cleave, but we'll see. These gray circles are the webs that are spawning. So right after this guy does the frontal, this guy spawns the webs that are baited on players. So you want your web people, like I have marked, to get their tethers. Ideally, you have both bosses next to each other doing damage. You have your tether people already set up because you know where this caster is. The other boss burrows away. He's going to do his charge across the room. Everybody is on this boss. You have your last line pretty close to this boss so that melee can easily switch over once he gets stunned. Charge goes through, boss gets stunned, everybody's DPSing boss. That was P1. And there's Intermission 1, as you can see. 1s, 2, 3. You stand in 2 or 3. Once 1 blows up, you move into 1. And then I think I had a quick example of how the debuffs might work in P2. So the debuffs come out like, I guess, during or right after the first port and suck. So the boss just void stepped to a location and pulled everybody in, and everybody ran out and broke their tethers. And potentially, I'm not saying this is the strategy we'd go with, but the idea would be everybody would run out, break their tethers, and get near the gate. The gate is going to go to the far side of the boss. The debuffs are going to come out. The person who is assigned to go first immediately gates and gets dispelled on the far side of the boss. Everybody else is moving over to that boss on the near side to do damage to it because now he's got a 50% damage increase. That debuff is dispelled. It'll last on the boss for 12 seconds. You want to dispel the second debuff at 10 seconds, giving you a little bit of window. Depending on how fast this person gated over and got dispelled, you will either do the second dispel in the same spot, or you will do it after the boss ports. So if you do it after the boss ports, basically the boss is going to port and then start doing his long AoE, so you'd be dispelling the second debuff near the start of that AoE. of that cast, and then you would do the third Dispel right near the end of the cast, either when there's less than 2 seconds left on the cast or less than 2 seconds left on the debuff. This would be the one that stuns the boss, and now he has 150% damage increase. So this is kind of the quick thing I thought up of, okay, how can you get the maximum amount of time of the debuff on the boss with everybody else still DPSing the boss without messing it up anyway. So that's one way that it could be done. Not saying that that's how it's going to be done, but that's what I came up with the day after I saw this boss. So yeah, any questions on P2 or Intermission 2? Okay. P3 is just both P1 and P2. So you have the charges and you have the Dispel mechanic. I do not know what the timing of the Dispel mechanic is to say how that'll work. But that is the general idea. It is, you're going to have to do the charge mechanic and you're going to have to do the Dispel mechanic. The main difference in P3 is that for the tethers for the charge, you no longer get the webs where assigned people can walk into and break them. You get the other boss doing its pull in and webbing everybody. So you can no longer have just assigned players handle the charge in P3, because everyone is going to get tethered to somebody else, but it's going to be random who they are tethered to. So basically what's going to happen is the boss is going to void step, pull everybody in, tether everyone. Nobody here should break their webs. Everybody should run together in the same direction to get out of the AoE, because you really don't know who has which webs and how many are gonna be left or whatever. So it's kind of just better to have everybody keep their webs if possible, so that you make sure you have enough. Boss is gonna go and do his charge. You just make sure you have at least 2 or 3 or however many it is tethers through to make sure the boss doesn't hit the end.
Do the tethers not have any negative effect? Like,
they do have a damage. They do some amount of damage. I don't remember how much it is. Small dot every half a second. So if you do this every 1 second, that's 340k. It's less than 10% of your health pool. It's like 5% of what mine was every second.
I would say, like, one way to go about it is just, instead of assigning pairs, you assign individuals, and whoever gets assigned to those individuals has to stay tethered with them.
Yeah, like, so you could do the same thing. That's what I had thought of as well, is basically whoever was assigned in P1 is also the people who you don't break with in P2. And you could just, or in P3, and you could do it that way. You could have everybody just keep it, because as you'll see, it's pretty quick after the suck goes off. So like we're at 6 minutes 7 seconds here. The boss does his charge like as the next mechanic that happens. So he's starting the charge at 6:17. So that's only 10 seconds of having the debuff on you. At this point, you just have everybody get in the charge, make sure the boss gets webbed, and then everybody can just break their tethers. So you don't really have to hold the tether for that long. It's like maybe 15 seconds. And it doesn't do that much, right? It's doing 5% of your health every second. So that's 75% of your total health bar over 15 seconds. That's really not a lot of damage. But it is an option. We can just say nobody breaks it first, and then you see who is like paired with the marked people, and those people don't break, but everybody else can break. But that might be just more complicated than just saying nobody breaks and everybody gets in the charge.
Yeah, it's if the damage is negligible, then you could just ignore it, especially if there's such a short interval.
Yeah.
You have to wait to break it.
Yeah. You see, the debuffs are out on people. We're about to kill the boss. We didn't just sit around and wait. So I don't know how long this is before the boss needs to be stunned. I think Northern Sky did just actually sit here and wait for like 12 minutes to see all the mechanic timings. So they have a log out there that could be viewed.
When does this boss enrage?
He doesn't. And actually, I'm pretty sure he does nothing after a certain point. Like, at least on testing, like his mechanic sequencing just stopped. So there's nothing going on.
Yeah, they must have just not put in rage timer yet.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll change it or something like that. But Yeah, so we'll have to look at a log for like what the timing is for these debuffs to see when the optimal time to start the spelling is. But yeah, that's P3. It's just a combination of the two important mechanics from P1 and P2. Any questions for that?
So it just makes me think of if they made Hive Mind the penultimate boss.
Yeah. For anybody who doesn't know what happens on Mythic, this fight sucks. On Mythic, every time a raid-wide mechanic happens or other just certain abilities happen, every single person in the raid is going to drop an orb. So basically how this works is on pull, both of these bosses are going to have like a 15-yard circle around them. And once 10 people are in that circle, they're all going to get a color. So red, blue. You can guess it. If you ever touch the opposite color, you die. Every time a raid-wide mechanic happens or specific abilities happen, people are going to drop orbs of their color. The other people of the other color have to come and soak those orbs within 8 or 12 seconds. If they don't, it does like a raid-wide AoE that like if 2 of them go off, you die. When you're soaking orbs, similar to Tindril Seeds, but not exactly the same. They didn't make it a raid-wide wipe if you soak more than you should. But if you soak 3 orbs, so you can soak 2, but if you soak 3, you die instantly and cannot be rezzed for the rest of the fight. People did not do this well on testing. Basically what they did was they had all their red people get in here, all their blue people get in here, and they stayed in 2 full camps the entire time. What that does is it makes you have to do incredibly large moves whenever you have to go soak orbs. So like the first thing that happens in the fight is the green dots go out on people. So on Mythic, that goes out on everybody. So that spawns an orb for everyone. So if you can imagine, you have 2 groups of teams, a red team over here, a blue team over here. Everybody is about to spawn orbs. You now have to rotate both teams over on the opposite sides of each other. Basically a 30-yard rotation to go soak orbs. Meanwhile, no melee are doing DPS because it's more important to soak the orbs than hit the boss. Ranged aren't doing much damage because they're running the whole time. That's not a very good system. I think what we're actually going to see like Liquid and Echo do is instead of having 2 entire camps of like red is over here, blue is over here, you switch everybody every time a mechanic happens, you're actually going to pair up of opposite colors. So like Tico and Cairn, one person would be red, one person would be blue. You're going to have to play very close to a person of the other color who might kill you if either of you step in the wrong direction. But if you're paired up, whenever a mechanic happens, you switch 5 yards and you're done. And everybody in the raid can just do that quick switch.
This is like kind of similar to how Lehuven was handled before they made the major change to it with the different debuffs, and it was different before because it auto shuffled on a weak aura which groups you had to stand with.
Yep.
But this is more like that plus like Sire Denathrius Mythic phase on top of that, which seems really aids.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it is Sire Denathrius P3 phase, but it's through the entire fight and through every single mechanic. The reason that I think like the pairs thing is going to be really good is because the mechanic overlaps that spawn orbs are insanely hard to deal with if you are in 2 separate groups. Because whenever the people who hit the webs in P1 to get the tethers, whenever they do that, they spawn orbs. But that's not everybody in their group, right? That's only 4 or 6 people who are doing that. But when that happens, that if you're in 2 entire groups of red and blue, that still means you need the entire groups to switch so that nobody's too close to each other and hits each other. Instead, if you have just pairs, so say the 2 people who you know are going to get tethered together, like me and Peaches, make sure we're opposite colors, red and blue. When we go in and get a tether together, we can immediately soak each other's orbs. Nobody else has to move. I'm like almost positive that's how this fight is going to get played out if it stays the way it is with the debuffs working that way. So like we would hit this, get our tether, make sure we're not too close to each other so we don't die when we do that. But then we would immediately switch spots, pick up our orbs, and then we would go stand where we need to for the charge.
But isn't there a mechanic where everyone just gets pulled into the boss though? Or they're
Yeah.
not marks out?
Yes. So that's in P2. There are marks. Marks are there for the entire fight. It's very unclear how that's going to work in Mythic. Nobody in public testing ever got out of P1.
I'm sure that'll be like probably like a grace period.
Yes.
For like a debuff that gives you a grace period for a certain amount of time.
That is kind of what is assumed, that basically it just won't spawn the orbs or won't kill you when you get sucked in. It might actually still spawn the orbs from where you get sucked or something like that, and you might have to have people go and soak them. P2 is going to be difficult with that. But yeah, I'm almost positive that this is the sort of system that we're going to see, is basically you're going to pair up like Sludgefish chains and you're going to be with your partner the entire fight.